very special guest today. They're all special, actually, but I always am going to call them special because they're all special to me. But Alicia Patterson is a licensed professional counselor, dance movement therapist, licensed massage therapist, and pelvic health mentor. She runs a thriving private practice in Colorado, which is how I know her. I actually started as a client of hers, offering somatic counseling, female pelvic health work, teaching, and consulting. I find the work she's doing incredibly important and powerful for connecting women with their cervix, with their womb. Alicia is a wealth of information. We talk about everything from cervical health, healing medical trauma, working through sexual trauma, how our voices relate to our cervix and our womb health. We talked about ancestral lineage. We talked about everything from witch hunts to the work she's doing today to really support women in connecting to their power center, their cervix and their womb. So I hope you will stay on for the whole call because she was really, really a great wealth of wisdom for women. Hi, Alicia.
Hello.
Thanks for joining today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So I like to let the listener know how we know each other and our relationships. So I will share that I first met you, Alicia, as a client of yours. Do you call us clients, patients?
I say client.
Client, yeah. And I actually had this really pretty chronic hip pain since like the births of my kids. I don't remember if it was the first or second, but on and off for like 10 years. And I had done everything externally I could think of, like, I would needle myself all the time, Rolfing, chiropractic, and things would work, but it just never felt like it really got to like the deep, gritty, like ache of it. And I had a friend of mine, I don't know if our mutual friend, I don't know if he do you work with men?
No, I've worked with male counseling clients, some energy work, maybe some like visceral, but I typically focus on female body. And
yeah, I think that this person had maybe not worked with you, but done some like intra-anal stuff. I'm not sure. Maybe that's a thing. I'm not sure. But so he was talking about the intravaginal work you do. And I was like, at this point, I'm willing to try anything because I think I was in a real state of pain. And I feel like not only did it touch on the pain itself, but I felt like I like went to another dimension. And it honestly really opened up. Like I had already been wisdom of the womb at that time, and I had been doing womb work, and I knew the importance of the womb and its like function, but I don't think that I had ever like tapped into the like the extra dimensional space and time travel or whatever we'll call it. So I feel like thank you for that. So I know that when I talk about that, some of the first things that people ask is like, is it sexual? I think that my husband and all my male friends were like hoping there would be some of that, but it was like there was no part of me that like I felt like I wasn't even like I was in my body, but also like so deep that it didn't even and you spoke to that a little bit when we started working, that occasionally women will feel that flush of energy or but that didn't I just felt really healed, and my hip is still much better. So
hey,
thank you.
Yeah, that's great.
So one of the things I wanted to like ask you about and start on is your work with the cervix, because I recognize the womb as really powerful in my fertility work, but I think that I don't nearly touch on the cervix as much as you do, as like both the gatekeeper kind of to the womb, but also I guess literally and figuratively really the kind of gatekeeper to the portal. So I would love to just hear your thoughts about that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So There's so many directions to go in around all of this. There's physiology and tissue patterns. There's the associations and the emotional, the spiritual, the like symbols and the myth. So it's like that constellation of star thing can happen when we talk about something as powerful as the cervix. So I'll probably start with a little physiology because it's grounding. It's really helpful. I wrote a recent email to my people about my process with my cervix, and then in my youth, I didn't know what it was. I had a doctor talk to me about it, and just right over my head and kind of lost on me. So the foundational educational stuff is so helpful and really important.
Mm-hmm.
The cervix is the bottom of the uterus. It's the end at the bottom of the tissue. It looks like an oval pink little donut, and it has this little like it's a hole, it's a little opening in the middle, and that's what expands to open if we're going to birth a child, and also to release blood and cervical fluid. And it's an organ, it's part of the uterus. It's so magnificent and has so much wisdom. And what can happen around the cervix is armoring, tension patterns, numbness, medical stuff can come up. Um, Maybe a gynecologist visit that didn't feel good, like whatever it is, there's so many things that can impact the cervix.
Mm.
And my thing with organs, and especially the cervix, it's the only organ that we can touch like that without surgery. So it's incredible that we get to contact the organ through gentleness and through intercourse and through just checking out our own body and like what's going on with our fluids and our fertility, and all. There's so many different ways that we can approach this. So the tissue power of the cervix is it's quite sensitive. And my beef with the medical world, I never want to smash the medical world, but my main struggle is that for so long the cervix was talked about as awkward, non-feeling, avoid it, just this
Huh.
like weird. And that's how I felt when I started learning. I was like, oh, and I had this medical thing come up for myself. So I want to approach and talk about the organs like they're like soft little animals.
Mm.
So sensitive, they're so wise, and they're so powerful. The cervix is the gateway to the womb. It's the gateway to birthing life into the world. And it's not only about having children, it can be about that. It's about creativity. Ultimately, it's the gateway for creativity. So, tissue wise, there's so much more I could say. The vagus nerve thing is really interesting for people. A research study came out, I think it was about 6 years ago now, that proves that the cervix is innervated by the vagus nerve.
Wow, I did not read that study.
It's
That's so
incredible.
interesting. Huh.
The brand Self Cervix, her name is Olivia. She has the research on her stuff. So that's a great website to look
Okay,
at for
yeah,
that
what's that?
research. And two other sets of paired nerves. So there's a lot of incredible nerve wiring that goes into the cervix. And the vagus nerve is a buzzword right now. Everybody's starting to talk about and learn that the vagus nerve is our main regulator, goes through our whole core. So when the cervix is impacted, it can really impact the nervous system pretty deeply, which is what I went through and what I have been writing about. And
Yeah, I think a
pretty,
lot of times, often women don't even often hear about or learn about or know about their cervix unless they get a diagnosis of like cervical dysplasia or HPV, or during pregnancy they have like shortened cervix. So when you say it like will innervate and activate the entire nervous system, can you speak a little bit about that? Because I find that really, I mean, it's important that we recognize how, our sexual being can affect our entire being. Like it's not separate. And often I think it's medicalized and kind of separated out. like you said, is like awkward or not talked about, but it really is our whole being.
Right. Yes. The vagal pathway, I always come back to anatomy and science because you can't argue with it.
I know,
So
I love that.
I love to rest on that. And I, for me and who I am, I love the energetics. I love the spiritual piece, the emotional piece. It's like it's so important and it's all there. And we'll get to that in a minute. But this vagus pathway thing, uh, what's going on in the world right now, neurology is so profound. The synapses and the neurons in our brain and how that talks to our nerves and how our nerves talk back to our brain is why I'm like, you can't be just top down and you can't be just bottom up. It really has to be both. And this vagal pathway is one of the most profound, most powerful nerves in the body. It's the longest nerve in the body. It snakes literally from the brain, center of the brain, down through the vocal cords, through the chest and the heart, pierces the diaphragm, which is this huge muscle in our core, kind of stuffed under our ribs. A lot of diaphragmatic release work is what I work with at times, very gentle. I'm not like a hard touch person.
Mm-hmm.
And then it winds its way through all of our endocrine organs. So it literally snakes its way through our core and then lands down in the cervix and the bladder. The vagal stuff is the most efficient, the quickest, the easiest, the most profound way to regulate the nervous system.
Mm.
So, neurology, neurological stuff, nervous system, they're like buddies, they go together. And we all have nervous system stuff going on. How can we be in this world, especially this big collective thing that's happening in 2020 and 2021? Our nervous systems are going to feel what's happening. So, my favorite way of talking about regulating the nervous system is to work with the cervix to stimulate it with a massage tool. It's very different than penetrative intercourse sex. And that's great. That's also stimulation, but that's a different rhythm.
Mm.
Usually, when people start working with their cervix, it needs to be much slower, much more attuned, more spacious, more emotionally permissive. So, how is that? Do you want more or do you want to kind
I
of
mean,
shift?
I always want more. I will say that for me, when we worked together, it almost felt like an unraveling of like I guess it would be connective tissue, right? Is that how you see it? Or like what do you see happening in terms of when you're working with the cervix and then how it's just like the biofeedback loop to then tell the body it's okay?
Right. Yeah. So tissue patterns are so incredible. I could talk about this for like our whole talk. You'll always stop me when you feel like we've gotten to a good baseline. The vaginal tunnel is a collapsible tube of tissue. It folds in on itself when we're resting, and it can deeply expand when we're having big pleasure experiences. And we want to have that malleability. The strongest tissue in the body is also the most flexible.
Mm.
Rigid tissue is usually also weak. So there are these different tissue pattern correlations, and absolutely there's an unraveling and like return of the tissue to their inherent wisdom. That's how I like to work. I don't do hard touch manipulative stuff. I'm just on the other end of the spectrum. So the tunnel, if you think of this long tube, the vaginal tunnel literally hooks onto the cervix like a suctiony, like a lip around the organ. And de-armoring the cervix is working with those tissue patterns. So there's the tunnel, there's the organ, and then surrounding those two, those are kind of like the foundational tissue connections. Surrounding that are the pelvic floor muscles and fascia. And fascia is so incredible. It's my favorite thing is an article I read that talked about fascia as the human consciousness of the body,
Huh.
because there's no breakage of fascia. Like our muscles, they start here and they attach here, and there's individual. The fascia is not that way. Fascia runs through our whole system, our face, our jaw, the core of our body, and our bowl, our pelvic bowl, is this little cereal bowl, and it's filled with fascia.
I almost envision it as like the mycelial network, almost like underground. It's like just kind of covering everything and making
Absolutely.
its way in. Yeah.
Totally. So, working with fascial patterns, working with muscle patterns, and then working with the vaginal tissue and the cervix tissue, they all work together. And fascia is like jelly. Like it literally feels like gel. And fascia has its own patterns. It can become very fixed, it can become tight, it can, I always talk about like the energetic feeling of what I'm touching with my hand. I always wear gloves, so the only barrier is a glove. And I'll feel like, I'm hitting a wall. Something in the body saying no, or it's numb, or it's fixed, or whatever.
Mm.
And against my finger, we get to work with all the internal patterns of the body. And fascia is, it's so incredible. Like people's face, their fascia and their face will shift from pelvic work.
Wow.
It's so cool. I had a lot come up through my mouth because I was working with
Ah,
critical stuff. I had this like metallic-y, like my mouth was purging because I was doing internal pelvic work. It was disgusting. And I'm also so glad I stuck with it because its toxicity really wanted to come out.
yeah. There's so much connection too between like the throat, right, and the cervix.
Right.
Mm.
Yeah. If you look at a video of the vocal cords, someone singing or talking, it looks like female genitals.
Yeah, I think I've seen that. It's
There's a mouth here and a mouth in the bottom. And
amazing.
cervix is like another mouth. So there's all these layers of tissues and they open and close to protect us and to help us. So, so fascial patterns, the body will say no to me. There will be rigidity, there will be numbness or tension. Again, I don't dig. I don't agree with that. I just hold and then things start to move. It's like conscious presence.
Hmm.
And I'm like, hello, how are you? And then the body starts to respond.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I really appreciated about your work in general was that you really hold it in like sacred regard. Like it feels like, I think about just the difference. Obviously, it's so different, but like going to a gynecologist where they barely look at you and then they like shove a speculum in and it's like, whoa.
Right.
And this is like, and I think a lot of, I would imagine people feel awkward about going in. Like I feel awkward sometimes just about getting a whack. So this is like a little bit more intimate than that. But it feels like such a safe space that you create. And
Mhm.
often I don't think we get that safe space, even in our like intimate relationships. Often it's like not necessarily like held as sacred like that. So I think it's important. And I'm curious about like, do you find that when you're working with women, for instance, who have like I'm thinking of like fifth chakra stuff or stuff about like using their voice or standing in their power of their speech, do you find like that shifts in working with cervical stuff?
Absolutely. Yeah. My voice shifted quite a bit.
Mm.
Uh, there's so much behind the voice and the connection to this deep sacred center. And I mean, the correlations are abundant, like the emotional stuff, the spiritual stuff, the tissue layers. And I tend to be like coming back to the tissue because learning about physiology has what made all of this so tangible and grounding for me. And
Mm.
I loved reading, and I study all the time. So in a book I read of a researcher, she went and spoke about female public health and sexuality and power in the body. And she was talking about this change in people's voice
Mm.
and high, fast, softer vocal stuff has correlations with anxiety and feeling ungrounded and just being all up here.
Mm.
When people do pelvic work and like in birthing, the roar, like it's the
Mhm.
cervical roar, is what allows the baby out. There's this real correlation between voicing, sounding, and the pelvis. So, and it's, sexuality, it's the same. If the sounds aren't moving, the pelvis tends to be blocked or asleep or tense or whatever it is.
Mhm.
So there's so much that moves through people's necks, their throat, their teeth, their jaw, their mouth. It's incredible to work with these patterns, and
Mhm.
it's so intricately connected with the root. And when I say root, I mean pelvic floor tissue and also cervix. I think of it as both. Some people say, no, it's the cervix. Some people say, no, it's the root. And I tend to it's the whole network for me.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm remembering during my childbirth, like when I was birthing, my midwife, I was like up here, like, oh, and she'd be like, get bassy, like groan. And I felt the difference of like that energy moving downward and opening as opposed to like, oh, like all up in here.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, I mean, I feel like you've told me this before, but I feel like it'd be interesting for the listener too, because it's not like a common practice that your work. So maybe like the path that led you here, because it does really feel like it seems like this is your like life's work. So
Mhm.
just kind of like the process by which you got to this point would be interesting.
Totally. Yeah, this is my mission. I'm 100% leaning into it at this point. I'm letting go of a lot of other work. Like this is my thing, and that's feels so good.
Mhm.
So let's see how to tell a short summary of the story that really has been about 13 years in the making and ongoing and evolving. The trajectory of my path is it's universal in a way, and it's also unique and personal to me. I got into, I think like the real shift in the phase of my life was when I discovered somatic therapy. I went to graduate school. My official titles are dance therapy and body psychotherapy and somatic counseling. And as I was getting into that, and I started doing work on myself and started understanding, what does trauma mean? What happens in the body? Like, okay, my life, my history, my experience of my pelvic story. I was in counseling, I was doing a ton of embodiment work, dancing. I had a long history of yoga and meditation and really starting to get in touch with that internal world. And I came to this point as I was in graduate school and as I was doing my work on myself. The pelvic process was like a parallel road. It was always there, like constant research and studying of
Mhm.
women's work and divine feminine and sexuality and all this stuff that I was just, that's where my energy was going. That's what I was choosing to focus on. And I started working as a counselor. And then it was so funny. I always tell this story. I was working with my long-term therapist, my first therapist, and and talking about my body, my sexuality, this surgery I had had, like all this stuff. And she asked me, because I got an abdominal massage, I was going to see a uterine and abdominal massage specialist. And that was my first real entry into pelvic process work that wasn't just like journaling and looking at events and kind of the heady part of it, which is very important. I always am like, please do that. And please also do the body pieces. So I had this appointment coming up, and for me, my logical was like, I'm getting into this because of my cramps, because I had menstrual cramping. And then I was really kind of taken aback and blown away with how emotional and tender it was. And so that really opened something up for me. I said, okay, there's something here. And oh, whoa. And I was talking with my therapist about it, and she asked me if I was going to do internal work. And my reaction was like, how dare you ask me that? Like, I would never, I was ashamed, I had all this internal stuff of like, I didn't even know what she was talking about. So that's my old defense pattern is I was like, I don't know. And I'm just going to be like, no. So I had this very funny, like that was so many years ago. That was my introduction to knowing the internal work was even a thing. I had no idea.
Mhm.
Then years later, I knew someone in my dance community. I'm so glad that I had this connection with someone that does this work the way that was really right for me. Very slow, very consensual, sacred center. Like I was not interested in the physical therapy, going in now and then doing all this
Right. Yeah.
work.
That feels like a completely different.
Yeah, it's a different thing. And sometimes it's really great, and sometimes it doesn't work for people.
Mhm.
So I just like to offer that there's more options out there. So I got to this point where I had done so much lineage work, family work, talking and processing and art and dance and reading, kind of obsessively. Like for me, I was like, I need help. Like I want to feel grounded. I want to feel centered. I hear people talk about that and I have no idea what they're talking about.
Mhm.
And I was longing to feel that in myself. So I knew this woman. I knew that internal work was a thing. I got to this point, and then I saw a social media post of someone else that I knew in community writing about this internal work process.
Mm.
Just kind of signaled something in me of, I'm really curious about that. And then I just left it there.
Mhm.
And so I was sitting with it and I was continuing my work on myself. And I was just like, it's kind of fallen flat for me at this point. Like I love it, but it feels like adjunctive and experimental. So I decided to shift into working with this practitioner. She's amazing. Her name's Elizabeth. I felt this movement in myself of like my brain. I can't really fully comprehend what all of this is about, but I have a really good feeling about her. And I've known her for years. And I know that I've talked and cried and raged and processed and journaled about all these things, and they're still in my tissues.
Mhm.
I just felt ready to really work with the tissue in a beautiful, consensual way. So I got into that work for myself, and within 2 sessions, I'm kind of a rapid like person. I
I would
said,
get along, or fire sign, right?
I decided I needed to do this work professionally. So I got into a lot more training, and it's been years now doing this work. And I'm so lucky to have studied with Tammy Kent as a pretty big voice in this world. So that's who I did my pelvic floor official training with.
Mhm.
And now I'm at the point where I see people one on one. It's incredible. It is booming. I think that this time of strife in the world is pressing the button on survival stuff,
Mhm.
which is associated with the root and the ground. It's very painful to be ungrounded in the world right now. It's kind of intolerable, is what I feel like I'm seeing.
Yeah.
And I'm teaching and training practitioners.
Yeah,
I'm
I
doing
have your conscious pelvis email pulled up.
uh-huh.
That's what you're talking about, right? This course you're doing? That's amazing.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm absolutely on fire about the world needs this. I
Mhm.
think that there's such a longing for this in the world, and that's why I love doing podcasts, because just talking about it,
Mhm.
I think people are like, oh, you're like, it's so simple and it's so normalizing.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. What you said a few times, and what I've been thinking about, and why I wanted to do this podcast in general, was the thread of community. That like I wouldn't know about this work, I wouldn't know about you, you wouldn't know about this work if not for community and other people who are not only doing the work themselves, but like through just doing it are normalizing it. And I feel like for this to be something that's normal, often women don't even begin to work on their womb or cervical health or menstrual health until they're infertile, in my case.
Mhm. Right.
So it's like just for it to be okay to like not need an excuse of like cramping, like you said, oh, I had cramps, so it's okay to do this. But like to just really be like, this is like, we're curious, we want to know, like it's okay. There's resources available, feels so important. So I really, really appreciate that. And before, oh, good, we have some time. I'm like, what time is it? Because I'm so curious about well, let's see. There was a few things I wanted to ask you about. I'm deciding which to go first. The main reason I thought of, well, the main reason I like wanted to do this podcast and then thought of you like right away, was because in my work I talk so much about like connecting to the things that make us feel alive and connecting to our pleasure. And I talk about things like dance or painting or art, but a lot of women are reaching out to me saying like, actually I want to talk about sexual pleasure, like women who are not orgasmic or women who are numb. And so I immediately thought of you
Mhm.
for obvious reasons, but because I feel like even though your work itself is not like sexual, it actually opens up the doorway to having a sexual response.
Mhm. Oh, yeah. It's the way I talk about sexuality with my work is I want to be with a whole person. I don't, we're not shutting out and shutting down the reality. Like, it's just real. Let's not pretend we are all sexual beings. So we hold that with a lot of love. And my work is non sexual touch. It's therapeutic, it's slow, it absolutely leads to deep expansion in the tissues, which can be very pleasurable. It's so, we don't want this to be like a torturous 2 hours for somebody. It's like, no, 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 no. And there's really uh, theories out there that say that like you should be in pain in order to heal. There's that. I just don't agree.
Yeah.
I'm on the let the body awaken, let the natural inherent rhythm of our system return to its full. It's so wise, we don't need to be doing that painful stuff. So the pleasure piece, the sexuality piece, I just acknowledge this with everybody. Like I have credentials, I'm working under credentials, I'm in an office, like I'm in a professional space, and we want this to feel good to you. And it absolutely can lead to incredible change in your sexual life with yourself and your partner outside of the therapeutic professional space. And so many people, then I work with the vulva. I do not like finger at the opening, going in. All those outer tissues are like, what about me? It's like that. So I do work with the vulva. I find it incredibly helpful. Every little thing is explicit and clear and discussed, which I think just makes people are like, oh, that makes sense. Like, okay, the confusion goes down and the trust goes up. And our intention is very clear that we're approaching the body with respect and reverence and honor and real listening, which, like you said before, is so different than most of our experiences, which is really sad to me. It's like, why did I only experience this in my adult life? And I've had all these years of this other shit, really. So when clients feel pleasure with our work, it is so common. And I always talk about this to just, this is part of it. So many people are like, sorry, did I do something wrong? Have I crossed a boundary? And so often it's not spoken, it's energetic.
Huh.
Something in their body is like better hold back, like better shouldn't do that here, whatever that stuff is. So working with that, whether it's just hesitation or uncertainty, like this is new touch, this is a new person.
Mm,
Sometimes shame, sometimes people have shame come up, they get flushed with like, this is wrong feelings. And that's usually the beginning of actual pleasure opening if people have that response.
mhm.
Some people are quite in touch with their pleasure and they're like, great, like, yay. It's not that common though, unfortunately. It takes
Yeah.
real time to open up to all of that.
Well, it's like, I think there's probably like an acute awareness when somebody's like working on that area and you're actually like stimulating blood flow and movement of blocks. But, so much about pleasure, like I'm just thinking of Mama Gina's work is like, lead from your pussy. Like, what feels good? What makes you feel alive? What is shut down? And it's like, we don't do that. Like that was like a lot of the times when I would like feel really alive, it was immediately followed by like, oh, I'm too much. Like I was too loud or I was too whatever. And
Right.
to like really give ourselves permission to like live in that state of like fullness and like who gives a shit if it's too much. It's like that's aliveness. It's like energy flowing. So I do think so much of it starts in our yoni space.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I like to normalize all of this because pleasure is vitality.
Mm.
Vitality in tissue against my hand. I can feel it. And this is why I love working with the body because the body doesn't lie and we just work with what's happening. And then we work with the voice and the psyche and how we're integrating all of that. Vitality in tissue is like warm, tingly, present, not hyperactivated, but not asleep. And that's flow.
Mhm.
Our immune system, that's our nervous system, that's our hormonal system. Everything is flowing and we feel good. It's like that's what feels good to us. And that's our birthright, I believe. We have access to that. And if we have resources to build access to that, that's a beautiful thing. And not everybody has resources to have this in the world. And in order to land in vitality, physiological, emotional, mental, spiritual, all those levels, oftentimes people come in with numbness.
Mm.
They have tension or they have pain or they have this sludgy, old, energetic, emotional. They're like, oh, like, I don't even know what that's about, but that's what I feel. I want to feel the pleasure. And we can't go from here to here. Like, okay, we have to
Mm.
go through it. And that's what leads to such transformation. And it's profound. It's
Mhm.
really quite incredible. And I'm like a living example because I used to be an anxious, ungrounded, scattered, really some tough stuff. And
Mm.
now I'm so healthy and I've done this pelvic work and my cycle is amazing. I'm drinking your herbs. They're
Oh, good.
so good. So if I can get into that space after having medical trauma, sexual trauma, lineage trauma, anybody can experience
Mhm.
pleasure and vitality in their womb, in their pelvis, in their relationship, whatever the stuff is.
Yeah. You segued right into it. I am so curious about the ancestral work you do and the lineage work you do, and how that comes up, and then how you just hold that, because that's some big stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my history and background as a counselor really helps me with that.
Mm.
The cervix is the spirit door. It really is. It's so powerful. So anytime we're working in proximity with the cervix, spiritual, ancestral, whatever you want to call it, past life, karma, ancestors, lineage, there's lots of different theories and how people language all of that. And I don't pretend to say this is what it is. Like, I know.
Mm.
I just know that it's a phenomenon and it really comes up for people. Most people that orient towards me want to do that work. I don't tend to work with as many people who are like, I'm leaking pee, please fix me. I'm more of like the process and the journey. That's my style. So anatomically, I don't have my pelvic model, but in my office, I have the model that shows the bones and then the muscles that line the inside of the pelvic bowl. And as we tend to get very far back into the bowl, like the deepest tissue that we can reach, and that takes time. Most bodies are not in the first session like, sure, go all the way back to my ovary, go all the way back to my cervical. It's like that really takes some time, mostly. And everybody has their own pace. So I like to make sure that I talk about that, like low expectations, low pressure on yourself is best. Once we get to working with those far back tissues, that tends to be where the lineage stuff
Mm.
is, which I have lots of ways to like explain and think about that. And it's also so magical and can feel mysterious that I don't want to like minimize it to just make it about the tissue. The womb is the gateway to the cosmos, to the big stuff, you know, the countless years behind us and what's living behind us in our human history and our heritage.
Mm.
So my story, I think I just talk about my own stuff because that is what's like, that feels right for me to talk about.
Yeah.
But it happens with many, many people that memories, feelings of an ancestor, like communicating with them, a flash of an image, and they're like, what is that? So all this type of stuff can start to happen. And it's a phenomenon that happens with so many different people and so many different versions. And my version of that was, so the ovaries, first I'll say, they're little hubs of DNA. They
Mm.
are little pockets of genetic material. So the ovaries are associated with this ancestral stuff. And when we get really close to the ovaries is when that tends to come up.
Mm.
And the second layer of the vaginal tissue are a different network of muscles, and that's more associated with like me and my life, my family of origin, people that I know about, my important relationships. And then the third layer of the tissue is near the ovaries and the cervix. And that's where this really big stuff, the collective
Mm.
stuff, comes up for people. So slavery, Holocaust, genocide, this like big, and sometimes not just the trauma. Usually the traumatic stuff is what wants to be cleared. So that's what will come up. And then like so much wisdom will follow because we all have like hundreds and hundreds of years of wisdom behind us. And I think of trauma as anything that disrupts the flow of that wisdom.
Mm.
So that could be in my body, that could be in my grandmother's body, that could be in someone who's way beyond anybody that I know about, like hundreds of years ago behind me. So that's spirit stuff tends to come in, and it's very powerful. It's very, very expansive. It's so beautiful. It can also be scary and disorienting for some people. It's kind of like tripping with plant work. Like it's like you have to surrender to the ride and stay in your body and remember who you are,
Mm,
or it can feel a little fragmenting at times, which
mm,
is why I always say I'm so glad I did a lot of work on myself before I did this work,
right.
as I had a pretty good foundation and I was still a little smacked in my face by what came up for me. And I wasn't educated about it, which is why I like to talk about it so that people know this is
Yeah.
what can happen.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that when I worked with you, I kind of like forgot about this actually, but I had um like a pregnancy loss like 10 years earlier that I had just was kind of like, yeah, that was the right thing for my head and my heart, and my like womb was like, oh, like all the grief of it came, and it was like for weeks after that I think I was really processing. And then beyond that, I like a lot of old power came back too. Like I think I had some old like witch activation was stored that I had been like shutting down before. So it really like it there's so much in there. And I am like so grateful to you that you're doing this work and you're talking about it and you're teaching it, because it's one of these things that I feel like our humanity does need. Like this is and I feel like it's not in response to the problems of our society. I almost feel like this is what was happening. This is what we were doing before. And it's almost like a return to what's whole and what's real and what's essential, as opposed to like, we're just going to respond to this toxic system. It's like, nope, let's go back to what I think we're doing probably thousands of years ago. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I feel the same.
Hmm.
Don't, you know, we used to know this.
Hmm.
Humanity, it's not that we forgot, it's that colonization wiped it out and tried to kill it. The lucky thing for us is that it did not get killed, it just went underground. And
Hmm.
there were amazing grannies and witches and teachers and herbalists and all these incredible women who forwarded it along, and I have access to it because I got it forwarded to me, and now I get to forward it along to anybody who wants to be in my orbit. And it's already there. We're not coming up with this magical new stuff. We are returning to what natural. And that's my thing with what I see with this technology advancing pace.
So fast.
The pelvic healing stuff, the centered, the holistic pelvic health is surging as technology goes up.
Mm.
Very interesting to me. So for me, I'm like, we are headed toward a moment in time where I really believe, is nature going to win or is technology going to win? So for me, I'm like, well, I know where I'm going to be, and the earth, the what's natural to human bodies. That's why I think there is a actual surge around this work. It's happening right now in my work. It's happening in your work. It's happening all over the globe. This is the next wave of female empowerment. And what's it going to take for us to like rise to that? Because there's a lot of fear and there's a lot of, like what would that mean for me, and which burnings are real, like we know that that happens, so how do we finesse that and massage that for ourselves? So that's my mission, and I'm pretty outspoken about it.
Yeah.
I want to empower people to consider, like, what does that mean for my life, and what is safe for me, and what is accessible for me, and how do I want to teach my kids, and all that type of stuff, because that's what's really going to make a difference 100 years down the road.
Well, I think what you're doing does. And I think for just for the listener, when you say that your training is available, is it for like what kind of therapist is it for? What kind of like past experience does someone need to have to get into that work?
Yeah, so I'm co-teaching with a physical therapist who she's so incredible. And she's one of the only PTs that I know that is really on the consensual, slow, like this is, your pelvic story. That's her language. Your
Mhm.
pelvic story is the real thing. So we're bridging quite different trainings and lenses and co-teaching. And what we're really figuring out is, do we want to offer this to people who do not have liability insurance? Like
Mm,
that's the real question. Do we want this to be totally touch oriented and it's people that are hands on? Or do we want to offer this to people that are maybe doing incredible online work, who are not insured, who are herbalists? And so we're kind of wrestling with that right now. But my take is that this is for everybody.
mm,
And if a woman wants to get into this work, if whatever it is, you have to kind of assess like where are you at in your career,
yeah.
where are you at with where you want this to go, what are the goals. I think anytime someone comes into it, this is a pretty complex training. It's a lot of information. We will be practicing hands-on work with each other. It's not like it's a, oh, maybe I'll show up for a day thing.
Mm,
It's a commitment. So I'm really excited to see where it goes. And for me, we all need this. So there's so many people that I think this is appropriate for. And I have a long list on my website of like, if this is you. And I
mm,
follow through so many different, um, there was one in another training that I did about this work. Somebody was an artist.
mm,
So I was like, if there was an artist who is not really focused on working with people, like I don't know if this is the right training for them. There's so much education out there that can be really palatable and accessible. So this is really a professional development
yeah.
training. And this has exploded my career. So I'm like, this is a gift. This is an amazing career. And it's particular, if it's not right for you, you have to listen to that because this is a
Yeah.
very it's a specialty, it's a specialized field.
Well, and I'd imagine that you get a lot of clients coming to you who have had some sort of trauma, which is why, they're having the resulting issues. So I'd imagine that at least having some trauma awareness would be a really important part of the puzzle.
Absolutely. Yeah, there are application questions on
Mhm.
the page. Everybody has to go through an application. One of the questions is, if you have active sexual trauma, what are you doing to address it? If you do have it and you're not doing much, we need to have a conversation about that. Like, this is not a substitute for therapy. This is a professional training environment. And I'm a therapist, so I'm like, please, like go get some support. We need support for this work. Otherwise, it can really blow out our psyche. Brain and pelvis are like, they really impact each other. So we want this to be safe and tolerable and sustainable. This isn't like a recapitulation of something painful.
Mm,
And so much comes up between women. This is a women's group. And there's so much happening around gender. So I want to be really sensitive around that. But I deeply identify with womanhood and I teach about the female body. And so does my co-teacher. So that's really our focus. And it's powerful to have a space where it's really about the wisdom of the body. And that's like number one.
mm. Thank you so much for joining me today, Alicia. It was really a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I am so grateful to you. I love connecting with you, and I hope this serves you and your people in so many ways.
I'm sure it will. I'm sure it will. Thank you so much.
If you enjoyed this episode and you want to hear more like it, be sure to subscribe, and I hope you'll rate and review as well. To learn more about how to connect with and explore your fertility, visit wisdomofthewomb.online.com and learn more about my fertility enhancing 12-week program at fertilelikeamother.com. Thanks so much for joining.